Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
There's that saying, in God we trust and all others must bring data. But what if the data is lying? Dr. Augustine Fou exposes why ad fraud isn't 1%. In this episode, discover how placement reports are faked, one setting that blocks 90% of fraud, and why cheap CPMs are actually really expensive. Don't sleep on this one and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
And just before we get started with this episode, Dee and I would love it if you could leave a review. Your feedback means a lot to us. It really helps us make the show better, and we really want to make this super valuable to you.
Welcome back to another episode of The Sleeping Barber. Digital advertising was supposed to be the most accountable channel we've ever had as advertisers and as practitioners. We were promised laser-sharp targeting, perfect attribution, and performance you could measure down to that last click and understand exactly what those behaviors actually were from every individual. But there's an uncomfortable question. What if that promise hasn't really held up? What if some of that data we've been relying on has been somewhat lying to us? Between fraud, fake clicks, phantom impressions, it's hard not to wonder how much of what we see in our dashboards is actually real. That's why today we're talking with someone who has been calling this out for years, always thought to be somewhat contrarian, long before people wanted to hear it. Dr. Fou is a former chief digital officer and independent ad fraud researcher, and honestly, one of the sharpest voices in the space. We're going to unpack what ad fraud actually looks like today, why even experienced marketers still get caught up by it, but most importantly, what you can do to protect your budget and your reputation. Dr. Fou, welcome to the show. It's honestly great to have you here.
Thank you, V. Thank you, Marc. Pleasure to be on with you guys. Happy to talk about this topic all day long.
Yeah, this is going to be great. V and I have been licking our chops for quite a while, just waiting for this conversation. So this is awesome.
Yeah, I half joke every time. I'm a reformed performance marketer, right? And I think it's become one of those taboo things in that industry if you're just, the performance guy, even though I've kind of made a career out of it. But the whole thing was that we were always able to trust the information, and there was this inherent trust that came with it as well. And that just accelerated, created a snowball effect for everything from a measurement perspective, but also an over attribution on ad spend that likely wasn't true. But before we get into all that, I want to hop into that way back machine. So humor me for a second. Going back. Mm-hmm. How did your career path bring you to focus on digital marketing and eventually moving into ad fraud?
It was completely unmeditated. I went to MIT for graduate school and was doing organic chemistry, chemical engineering. So nothing to do with what I do today. But I guess the thread that ties it together is the scientific method. So I've always loved numbers. I've always loved data and analytics. And digital, like you said, had the most measurable medium ever, right? You could measure every click, every page view, and things like that. So absolutely. I went into it, again, not with a lot of planning. I fell into it. I was at McKinsey & Company in 95. And in the New York office, we started the multimedia lab. And at that time, it was 2 Apple computers, 2 Sun workstations, and 2 IBM PCs. And at that time, the internet was basically text pages with a few words that were underlined. And you could click those and go to the next page, right? They didn't even have images yet at the time. So, our task with the multimedia lab was to kind of educate the associates about the potential impact of the internet. So we wrote internal articles about, how it would impact industries. And fast forward 30 years, literally to this year, 2025, I've actually seen how dramatic that impact has been across many industries, including ours, right? The advertising and marketing industry. So with that, I decided to leave McKinsey in 96 rather than be a spectator to the internet. Had to jump in with both hands and feet. And here in New York, we call it Silicon Alley as opposed to Silicon Valley.
Oh, I didn't know
and
this.
New York was very advertising focused, right? So while Silicon Valley was very tech focused, here in New York, we were very advertising and marketing focused. So kind of been in the internet, specifically digital marketing since the very beginning, and have witnessed the entire arc of the evolution of digital marketing. But like you said, there is the promise and then there is the reality. So like a lot of things, it might sound good in theory, but when it comes to the real world application of it, you really have to take into account the fact that bad guys are deliberately trying to rip you off, right? So if you're looking for more clicks, they can actually generate more clicks for you, right? So
Yeah.
depending on whatever metric you're looking at, right? If you need more impressions to buy, they can generate more
I got you.
impressions for you,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of how we got to it. So, my background is science and kind of applying the scientific method to digital. And then that's kind of why I was starting to ask those questions. Like, there's way too many clicks here to be real. Humans don't click on ads that much. But anyway, that's kind of how I fell into digital
I love
marketing
that.
and the analysis of fraud and bots.
Yeah, was there, I mean, you spent time marketing roles and leading marketing and supporting through digital, like as a
Yeah.
chief digital officer. Was there a particular campaign you were just like, wait a sec, or was it just like an aha moment or some turning point
Yeah.
there?
I spent time at two agency holding companies. First was Interpublic Group, and then the second was Omnicom. And when I was at Omnicom, we were serving pharmaceutical, med device, healthcare clients. And it wasn't just one campaign. We were just noticing strange things like 100% click-through rates on many search campaigns because pharma at the time was doing a lot of search, paid search. And so I said, that can't be possible. What's going on? And at the time, more than 13 years ago, no one could really explain it to me. And when you look at the averages, they were like 10% click-through rates across everything. So they were saying, "Yay, it's working so well. Let's do more of it." But as it turns out, if you really dug into the data, we could actually, you sort it by the site or the app. You could see some of these sites had 100% click-through rates. So clearly that wasn't right. So that's when I left Omnicom and said, okay, I have to build some tools to help myself and help the clients audit the campaigns and figure out what the hell was going on. So that's kind of when I left Omnicom in 2012, 2013, and started building some of these tools. That's now the platform called Fou Analytics that we use for advertisers.
You've been warning about this for years, and I think many dismissed it, especially early on.
I totally did. I've not take a shot at you, but I totally was for the longest. I've seen you forever online. And when V and I were prepping this, I just sort of interrupted V, but like I was one of those guys. Like I was like, that can't be right because I was in it for so long. I'm like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like,
and to this day, there's a lot of parties, including the big agency holding companies. They still don't want to hear what I have to say, but I will tell you that the pandemic in 2020, that was kind of the external shock that caused everyone to kind of think a little bit harder. Because before the pandemic, everyone just wanted to keep doing what they were doing. It was comfortable, right? No one wanted to rock the boat. But when the pandemic rocked the boat for everyone, then we saw the marketers saying, okay, we better take a closer look because we're spending a ton of money here. And, we can't afford to be wasting our money. So as budgets get tighter, and,
exactly.
More recently with the tariff shock of early 2025, even more marketers are saying, okay, our costs are going to go up and whatever. So we have to find ways to cut costs. And so there's been a flurry of advertisers asking for my help to audit campaigns now. And it's really taken off recently because now they're saying, fraud can't be the 1% that the legacy fraud verification companies have been telling us for 10 years straight. Right, literally looking at their quarterly market quality reports, it's been 1% IVT for the past 10 years, and it's not 1%. And even the marketers themselves know that now. Yeah. So they're saying, okay, it's got to be something else, and that's why they're asking for help to look more closely.
So that begs a question, though. What do you think the core misconceptions leaders still hold today about ad fraud? That it is only 1%? Or is there anything else there?
No, I'm going to put the blame squarely on the legacy verification vendors. I notice I'm not using their names because it will be slander. So it's just legacy, whatever verification vendor they had been using, they've been publishing it, right? So it's all out in the public. They've been saying it's 1% for years, but I think most people now understand that the 1% is not all the fraud there is. It's all the fraud that these vendors could catch. And that's a very big difference. So when I said I put the blame squarely on their shoulders, the verification vendor shoulders, is for the past 10 years, if you and the trade associations keep telling the marketers that it's 1%, a lot of them, will say, okay, well, they said it's 1%, so let's just keep pouring more money into it and take
Yeah.
money out of TV, take money out of other channels and put it into digital. Because if it's 1%, it's working great, let's just keep spending more money.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to talk about the attribution problem in a second, but on the surface, it just looks like it was low frauds. If the fake sites have low fraud because they were incorrectly marked by the verification vendors, and the real sites, like the real publishers, have low fraud because they actually have low fraud, then in the eyes of the ad buyers, it's like, why would I pay $35 over here to a mainstream publisher like New York Times when I can get the same stuff for $3 or even 30 cents CPMs over here in programmatic?
Exactly.
They thought it was the same. So that's what I mean by, because of the failure of the verification vendors to detect the fraud, they essentially put everyone, including the bad guys, in the same bucket. And that's what misled the advertisers into overspending in digital, which now I believe that the pendulum is starting to swing back the other way because they're saying, okay, this can't be true. We better look more closely.
Yeah. I think, we're kind of getting a vibe of that too with just the conversations we've been having and hosting. And I think with cookies in some ways going away, it made it more appealing to go back the other way too, because you're like, oh, maybe we can't. But it wasn't the fraud, I don't think.
It's a convergence of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? The cookies they were using to track, target people with ads and then track them. But it's like, well, what if the cookies were manipulated by bots, right? Because in, say, retargeting campaigns, the bots are smart enough to deliberately visit the advertiser's site first to collect the retargeting cookies, and then they would earn a higher CPM elsewhere. So even that,
That's wild.
the fact that the user has a cookie doesn't necessarily mean the user is a human. So, those are things that, I've been writing about this for 15 years, and it's all been backed by the data that I've had. So it's not like I'm just making up stuff. This is what I'm seeing in the data. It's hard to believe, right, if you're on the other side. But it's like, okay, now they're finally coming around to believing me.
So it's if not 1%, if we just take this into a dollar number and make it super easy, like let's say it's $100. I have $100 that I spent on digital media, and there may be a few different caveats that you want to include on this, but how much would you say is typically lost to fraud, and what are the most common contributors to that?
So I'm gonna not answer the question.
Okay.
And not say a typical rate, because here's why we really can't say a typical rate. When you have a fake site and no humans actually know your site exists, or when you have 10,000 fake sites made by WordPress template, humans don't go to those sites. So 100% of the traffic to those sites is bot traffic, even if the verification vendors can't detect it as bot traffic. So that's the same question applies to what's the average rate of bots on the entire internet. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the reports that say 50% or maybe up to 60, something 2/3 of the traffic on the internet is bots. That overall average, and when you ask the question about the typical fraud rates, it's not a helpful thing, because when you're buying a lot of programmatic ads and most of it's going to fraudulent sites and apps, it's literally 100% fraud. If you're buying from legitimate publishers like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, whatever, right, the publishers that you've actually heard of, there could be like 1 to 5%. And those bots are always on their site, not because they wanted it, right? Not because they purchased the traffic, but because they're public web pages. And now with AI bots, right, they're there to steal their content for something, or AI training, whatever. So you can see how wide the range is, right? When you're buying from programmatic and you're not using an inclusion list, literally almost everything in there could be 100% fraud, including the mobile apps and the fake websites. Whereas if you're using a very tight inclusion list of 500 to 1,000 sites, then it could be 1 to 3%. It totally depends on how strict you are in terms of your campaign setup and what you're buying and how you're buying. So that's why I avoided the question to say, what's a typical fraud rate? Because it's going to be misleading, whether it's too high or too low. It totally depends on how strict you are and whether you care about your own dollars. I can say that part of the blame over the last 15 years has to go with the advertisers. because
Absolutely.
procurement departments have been asking for far too much quantity. There's not 10 billion ads to buy per month, and you can't ask for, $1 CPMs and expect to get something real, because real publishers can't sell it for $1 CPMs. So some of the pressure that the advertisers have been applying, right, specifically the procurement departments on their agencies and wherever, have basically caused them to, or forced them to buy fraud. Not because they wanted to, but that's the only way you can get those massive, massive quantities of impressions at super low CPM prices.
I remember when programmatic started to become a thing. And again, it was one of those tools where all advertisers, practitioners were like, oh man, okay, we're going to get access to remnant inventory. We'll be able to pay less. This is another godsend tool. But there's been studies that are showing that 50 to 70% of spend is on programmatic platforms is actually waste. Yes, the question could be very simple, like, why do you think that is? But I would argue, why hasn't there been more accountability at the CMO, CFO level? Because I think this is where the problems really live.
Yes, perfect transition to when I said the attribution problem.
Yeah.
Because while they're spending in digital, they see sales happening.
Right.
Sales are happening concurrently. So in their mind, especially if you think about the digital marketing director who just spent $60 million on digital ads, they're going to say, oh yeah, we caused that.
Of course.
So
Of course.
yeah, the digital marketing didn't cause it. Like if you think about soup and soda and toilet paper and paper towels, all of those things are still being purchased in the grocery store. It just happened to be you're running digital campaigns simultaneously. There's no cause and effect. There's not even correlation. Okay, but yet the digital people wanted to believe that those sales were caused by the digital marketing that they were doing. Now you might ask the next question, which is, okay, what about the e-commerce ones where you can actually see the e-commerce purchases on the website? In that case, we get into over attribution, either accidentally or over attribution due to deliberate fraud. So now there's ways to game the system. And let me just spend 1 minute on talking about view-through conversions and the history of that. So years ago, a lot of these ad tech companies were complaining, oh, well, Google search gets too much credit for driving the sales because search happened to be the last click, right? And that was because of human habits. Right? If you see something on a Super Bowl ad, you're probably not going to just buy it right away. You're going to go online, search for more information, inform your purchase. And then ultimately search became the last click before the purchase. That's why it got so much credit. So then all these companies that were selling display ads were saying, oh, it's so unfair that search gets all the credit. Banner ads and video ads must have some effect on driving sales. And yes, they do. But again, when you realize as a seasoned marketer that one display ad doesn't drive one sale. It contributes to it, right? Awareness and whatever, but it doesn't cause a sale. However,
it's like you're living inside my brain right now. Like I lived this experience. So both V and I did. Yeah.
I think we're totally on the same page. I mean, these are what seasoned marketers know, but there's too many young marketers who don't know this.
And now a short word from our sponsor.
This episode was sponsored by Quadical. Did I say that right? Quadical?
You did. Quadical. Yeah.
Quadical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quadical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company, and so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber podcast.
Love that
because I give so much time to it. But Quadical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing, and we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million. And helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quadical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber podcast. And for all those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quadical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show.
But in terms of the view-through conversion, it was a very convenient form of attribution because the way they set it up was that, we'll track the ad exposure, right? So when that person or that device was exposed to the ad, they would cookie that device. And then once that cookie marked that device as exposed, meaning exposed to the ad, that would start the counter on 30, 60, or 90 days after. And if they saw any kind of purchases within that attribution window, they'll say, oh, yeah, that was caused by let's assign that back to the display ad. So that was created a long time ago, and it's kind of accepted by a lot of marketers, the view through conversion concept, to say, oh yeah, we can now attribute these sales that occurred in that window back to the display ad or the video ad. But conveniently, so again, just like we said earlier, some things that are good in theory turn out to be abused in practice, in reality. So what the bad guys are doing and what the ad tech companies are doing is they're over attributing the sales to display ads, video ads, and all that. So that's how you're saying, wow, these campaigns are working so well. We're getting such huge ROAS or ROI, or return on ad spend, or ROI. It wasn't because of that. It's because the sales either had already occurred or would have happened anyway in the absence of the ads, but it's a figment of the reporting. Right, the attribution reporting over attributed the sales to the display ads, so you think it's working. And that kind of answers your question, like why do CMOs and CEOs and CFOs not complain? Because the CMO is showing them all these ROAS reports and ROI reports to say, oh yeah, it's working really well. We're driving tons of sales. What they didn't do is ask the next question. Okay, well, which one of those sales are incremental?
Yeah.
So that's why they think it's working.
There's also this thing where I think it's almost Lord of the Flies kind of an approach within a marketing department where every person who owns a channel has any responsibility for budget is being asked to prove a return. So then you have all these people individually going, oh yeah, I did that. That. And then
it's
not holistically, right?
And my channel show those reports. Yeah,
my channel shows me that I did this. My channel shows me that I did this. And so yeah, there's so much of that competition within the departments to justify existence.
Exactly. And I've even heard the marketers, the marketers are saying, if I don't spend my budget this year, I won't get as much budget next year, right? So not only do they have to prove that it worked, but they also want to spend it all. And that's what drives them to buy irrational quantities, even if it's not driving an incremental return.
Yeah. Even that one is a bit of an incentive, and I wanted to ask, or both of us want to ask about incentives and just like who's benefiting from this remaining an unsolved problem?
Everyone. See, so that's actually the right question to ask. So I've said in the past, ad fraud is not a tech problem; it's an incentives problem, right? And throwing more tech at it, like all these new verification companies, fraud detection companies, it's not going to solve the problem, because even those companies, right, back 10 years ago when I started my company, I said, I don't want to be a fraud detection vendor because I would rely on fraud to continue so that I could keep making money from detecting it. So I said, that doesn't make any sense. So for the lack of a better term, when I first started out, I called myself an ad fraud researcher, because the way I made money was to audit the campaigns, get paid for the audit, and then deliver the recommendations via PowerPoint. So I said, I can't be a fraud detection company, right? Even though there are others, even companies that are public now, making revenue off of fraud detection. So the reason I said everyone is because if you think about any middleman, like the ad exchanges, they make more money when there's more volume that flows through their pipes. So they actually don't care whether it's fraudulent volume, meaning driven by bots, or real. They just want more volume.
Yeah, they're getting paid anyway. Yeah.
And it's very convenient for them to use the legacy fraud verification companies because they kept saying it's 1% fraud. So everybody was happy. Let's keep buying more and more and more. And then even the marketers themselves, like we said earlier, they have to spend their budget. So when you think about a super large CPG company, I won't name them, that has $2 billion to spend per year in digital, there's not enough real inventory to buy. So in essence, they're forcing their agency to go out and find the cheap stuff and go out and find impressions from anywhere so that they can spend their budget in full. So those kind of incentives are what keep ad fraud going. But I think finally, again, I'm seeing the pendulum swing the other way. Some marketers, right? Again, we can't solve this for the entire industry because not everyone cares. If there are marketers that actually are looking at their own incremental sales, they'll say, okay, well, I can be spending a lot less and still drive more sales than I am right now by actually showing ads to humans. So I think that a kind of revolution is starting right now, and I think that's the right direction for the.
It's really funny because I'm personally kind of stuck in this weird place where maybe now because of my tenure, it's easy I don't need to showcase like the low CPMs anymore. I can make the case for the more expensive ones because, you're trying to attack those, a premium inventories, make sure you are kind of going in front of the human. And I remember having a conversation with our chief digital officer, just having a very candid conversation around this. And I remember saying, you can't look at this from a CPM level or a really low cost per click, because we want to make sure that we're driving, high intent audiences, and those audiences actually cost more if you're doing it the right way. Now, this issue, though, has always been somewhat of a marketing issue, and marketing does own a lot of this. But when does this become more of a corporate governance or shareholder level problem that we need to make sure that we're really kind of speaking to?
It should have been, and it should be now, and more, CFOs and shareholders should get involved in this because, on an extreme end of this, just yesterday I was looking at a campaign and there were a ton of .ru sites in there, Russian sites. Do you want to be spending your ad budgets funding Russian websites? I mean, that's just one example, right? There are many other bad sites like porn sites, piracy sites, whatever you don't want to be funding, but yet you are, and you don't see it because you don't have the right data when you get the reports from your platforms. Okay, so that's one extreme. The second is just waste, right? You could have saved half of that $2 billion and let that $1 billion go straight to your bottom line, right? If you're a CPG company and you're struggling to maintain even 1% margins, okay, just letting that $1 billion flow all the way down to the bottom line means you just doubled your margins. There's a lot of money that doesn't need to be spent. And so when you talked about, humans versus bots, in the past, I guess 15 years, when these legacy verification vendors have been around, you'll notice that they only report on IVT, invalid traffic. They don't measure for humans as well. In my platform, we have both red, which is bots, and blue, which is humans. And you have to measure for both. You can't just assume that if it's not bot, that it's human. So a lot of people did that, right? So if they said this is 1% bots, everyone just assumed the other 99% was human. And you can't do that, right? What we're now finding is that these legacy verification vendors, the bots have years of practice blocking their tags, which means that if their tags are blocked, they have no data. And so out of that 99%, an unknown percentage of that is simply where they have no data with which to mark the bot as a bot. That's why they've been reporting such low IVT for 10 years. So now, again, going back to the humans, right, the blue part, I'll use a very simple way to explain the CPM thing. CPM is a price and not a cost, but it's been talked about incorrectly by agencies as cost efficiency. It's not actually a cost. So what I mean by that is you used to be paying $30 CPMs, and now you're paying $3 CPMs, but you're buying 10 times the quantity. So you're still paying $30 of cost. You're now just buying it from cheap places, and therefore most of it's subject to fraud. And one other way to think about this is if you're buying a huge number of ad impressions, but only 10% of those ads were shown to humans, your effective CPM for what I call HCPM, human CPM, is 10 times that, because you have to buy 10 times more quantity to show the same amount of ads to humans.
That's a good point.
So it kind of makes sense. If you care about showing ads to humans, go pay a way higher CPM price to a real publisher because they have human audiences. And you can buy 1/10 of the quantity and you'd still be saving money. Right? So I think a lot of that is a misnomer, right? They were calling the lower CPMs as cost efficiency. It's not actually cost efficiency. Right? So a lot of that just led to misunderstanding and people just wasting money chasing lower CPMs, which are prices, not cost.
I was thinking about campaign planning a little bit, and some of the things you're talking about, the one thing that keeps coming to mind is, when we think about planning a campaign, the idea digital, we were supposed to go one-to-one targeting, right message, right person, right time, and zero waste. Then literally yesterday, I was just trying to put a campaign in, and I had the option of clicking on or off the audience expansion network. And I'm like, oh, look at that, what it does to the CPMs. They're way cheaper now. I reach way more people. And so I'm wondering, that idea of like, on one hand, I have all these targeting features. On the other hand, I can do this audience expansion, which drops down CPMs and that kind of stuff. In my mind, before I would have looked at that and go, oh, this is amazing. I get no waste and I'm doing all the targeting I want. And, is that real? Or is that just a myth?
Well, basically what you're talking about is assumption built on top of assumption built on top of assumption, right? So you assume that targeting's working. You assume that you're reaching a larger audience that are humans and all that kind of stuff, but it's actually the opposite. So the audience networks, I would actually call it Fraudience networks, right? Conveniently, you can just put an FR in front of it. It's Fraudience networks. I mean, bottom line is humans are logged into Instagram and Facebook all day long. They're logged into Gmail, Google Maps, YouTube all day long. Okay, that's where the humans are. When you go into the audience networks, right, Facebook audience network is basically every other site and app that's not Facebook and Instagram, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you have a lot of volume and they have an incentive to cheat. And therefore they do, because those sites and apps get a share of the revenue, right? Facebook gets a share as well, so they don't care. But yes, you're going to be able to get enormous quantities of impressions and even clicks. But you have to ask the next question. Is it real?
Mm-hmm.
Will any of those convert? Are any of those human? And they're basically not. So we have data on that. So literally every single audience network is just there to fluff the numbers and the clicks. So for Facebook, make sure you turn off FAN, which is Facebook Audience Network. For Google Search, make sure you turn off Search Partner Network. For YouTube, make sure you turn off Google Video Partners, which are all the sites and apps outside that run those ads. For TikTok, make sure you turn off Pangle. That's their audience network that has all these crappy apps and other sites in it that's not TikTok. So if you want to do a TikTok campaign, the humans are on TikTok. They're not on all the other, 500,000 apps that nobody's ever heard of before. But yet, if you're an advertiser that just wants more impressions, more clicks, of course you use that. And of course, your average CPM is going to look a lot lower. But you basically just got 1.6 billion TikTok views in 1 hour. Okay, there's only 7 billion humans on Earth, and not all of them are on TikTok all the time, right? So, I mean, just common sense stuff. But I think, again, it's taken a number of years before the advertisers realize that, oh, yeah, we got 1.6 billion views in 1 hour. Okay, that's not real. And even if it were, it's kids. They're not going to be buying your car or whatever. So I think, it's like a return to rationality is what I'm seeing and what I'm hoping for. So
I love that.
Let's go drive that together.
I love that. We know digital platforms, there's infinite ways of targeting, right? You have the gender, geo, interest, contextual, purchase, intent, all of this, right? While on the one hand, and applying this, what you just said, like being more critical, we've also come to know that even something as simple as age or as gender, the systems don't even get it right 50% of the time.
Correct. And that's because it's all inferred. Okay, so let me again go back. I've been in this for long enough. I can tell you how it's evolved. So again, at the very beginning, that made sense. That sounded like a good idea, right? If you have an anonymous user, right? So when we were talking about the open web, most users don't log into publisher sites, right? They read an article and they leave. So they're kind of anonymous cookie. But when we started tracking their behavior and what sites they visit, we would say, oh, if this anonymous cookie visited Playboy, Maxim, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, it must be male because they visited those types of sites, right? If this other anonymous cookie visited Venus, which is like a female shaving product, feminine hygiene products and things like that, that's got to be female. In those simplistic cases, you could kind of derive that they were male or female. But when you look at a visit to Amazon, well, what can you infer? You can't infer even male or female or age or whatever. So then it became a lot messier. So when we started with that assumption that we could infer things about the person just by looking at the collection of sites that they visit, it became erroneous, right? So a lot of the targeting parameters are just incorrect. And when humans started looking into their own profile, we've seen these cases where one person is marked as both male and female, and they're marked as both young and old, because it was all inferred. And in the eyes of the data broker, right, they have incentive to mark them as both male and female because then they can get ad impressions for that cookie from both advertisers targeting males and advertisers targeting females.
Females, yeah.
If they only chose one of the gender and they try to be accurate about it, they will only get half their revenue. So there's an incentive for the data brokers to not be that accurate as well. Now, layer on top of that, fraud. So all of that we can just chalk up to accidental stuff and just the inferences were not correct. But when the bots take advantage of this, they will deliberately go visit a collection of sites. They would deliberately look at swing sets on Amazon at the beginning of summer, right, in April and May, because they know they're going to get retargeted, right? They know that humans behave that way. And if that cookie that's controlled by the bot looks at these certain products and visit these websites, they're going to be put in a particular audience segment, and they're going to earn higher CPMs when they get retargeted by the advertisers thinking that those were legitimate targeted users, right? So I think you have to take that into account. You have to think like a bad guy to say, okay, yeah, this is how I'm going to be taken advantage of, so I need to be careful about that.
Thinking about like size of the advertising spend in the United States, I think it's in the billion. I can't remember, hundreds of billions?
Yeah, it's like 300 something now, and globally like 600 something billion.
And it's funny because as you're talking about it, I'm like, oh, it's amazing that this is happening. But then again, I'm like, but then I'm thinking about the size of the industry. I'm like, no, it's not amazing. Like there's a huge financial upside to doing this. And just the same as like, it's amazing how AI works. I shouldn't be surprised that there's equally sophisticated tools and things happening in the background to create the fraud from bad guys, because there's a huge financial opportunity.
Huge incentive, right? Every year there's a pot of gold worth $300 billion in the US for you to steal from. And that pot of gold is sitting with no lid on just by the side of the road. It's like, do you want to take it or not? You'd be dumb not to. That's how easy it is and how trivial it is for bad guys to take the money. And the entire ecosystem is set up to facilitate that. As we said earlier, from the legacy fraud verification companies that can't catch anything to the exchanges and all the middlemen who make more money when there's more flow that flows through their system.
Based on the general recommendations you maybe have given other people, let's call that the data, not just what we would normally think of by my own internal data, but your data. What are some of the best practices that you recommend for people, aside from, I know you mentioned before, turning off the audience expansion networks? Are there other recommendations that you have in terms of media planning?
Yeah, a lot of these things are non-technical, and you don't need my tech, you don't need anyone else's tech to do it. And the turning off of audience networks, like I said before, will help you avoid 90% of the fraud to begin with, right? So just that one step. It's like, if you do that, you don't need my tech, you don't need anyone else's tech, you've already avoided most of the fraud. Now, when it comes to programmatic media buying, it's always better to buy direct. It's always better to use an inclusion list. Now, people are saying, oh, well, we can't go negotiate deals with 10,000 websites. Okay, well, that's good because you don't need 10,000 websites. I give a challenge to my students in class. I say, name 10 websites you visit every single day. Okay, they'll start rattling off a few. They'll actually start to slow down when they get to 6 or 7 or 8. They can't even name 10 websites that they visit every single day. And you can do the same with mobile apps. I say, name 10 mobile apps you use every single day. They can't get to 10.
No.
So if humans are using a very finite set of mobile apps and websites regularly, those are the sites that have sufficiently large human audiences. So when you do an inclusion list, you don't need 10,000 sites. You don't even need 5,000 sites. You could probably have 1,000 sites and cover the majority of humans that are your potential customers. That way, by having an inclusion list of a very small number of real sites, real publisher sites, of course, your volume is going to be much lower. And of course, your CPM average is going to be much higher. But you're getting ads in front of humans. And humans will potentially be your customer. Bots won't, obviously. But again, that's so foreign to a lot of marketers after 10 years of bad habits that it takes some time to kind of unwind and get them to that state. So again, use inclusion list. You can actually simulate a direct buy very easily. You can use programmatic tech to buy it. but just say this one supply source, meaning one exchange, and this one seller ID or one deal ID. And in essence, you're using programmatic and you're buying from that one real publisher. You don't have to go talk to them. You don't have to negotiate with them, happening through programmatic, but you're basically avoiding all the other leakage and the fraud and the other unnecessary supply paths that cause you to waste your money. So that way, you're essentially simulating a direct buy using programmatic technology like you always do, and you're going to be avoiding 90 to 99% of the fraud. So then your campaigns are going to be running very clean, right? I actually have clients that are doing that right now, and they're using Fou Analytics to kind of keep an eye on it because it's so clean. I mean, there was a recent case where DB360 just changed some stuff without our knowledge and without us changing anything in the campaign setup. All of a sudden, we see a huge influx of mobile apps into the campaign. We said, we didn't change anything. So again, even if you're at a steady state and you're buying inventory, good inventory, you still have to have some kind of analytics so that you can see if there's anything that just goes awry or anything change unexpectedly in your campaign. And so that way, it's a much simpler way of buying. I mean, if you're not using an inclusion list, there's literally unlimited bad guys that you have to block. Unlimited fake websites, unlimited fake mobile apps. You've seen some of my articles. It's a dictionary attack. The bad guys are just making up these mobile app names, right? It's literally, we've gone from 3-word mobile app names to 4-word names to 5-word names. I've just recently seen 10-word mobile app names that make no sense. It's just 10 dictionary words strung together. And that's how they can just multiply the fake apps that they're using to chomp on your ad budgets. So again, you can't block all of them. So therefore, go to an inclusion list. It'll make your life a lot simpler when you're buying through programmatic.
Yeah. I wanted to shift the conversation and move more on the metrics and kind of like the decision-making side. And I think I know the answer to this next one, but I think I still want to ask it for our listeners. I'm a marketer. I'm sitting there reporting on campaign performance, and I'm looking at things like reach, PCs, CPM. We talked about CPM. You mentioned ROAS as an example. How much can I actually trust those metrics when they're coming from the platforms?
Put simply, not at all. You should never trust anything.
I knew it.
From the platforms you buy from.
Table flip.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not even trying to be funny. It's literally, I would not trust anyone or anything unless I can independently measure it myself. And let me talk about practically how to do that. It would be basically running holdout groups or turn-off campaigns. Recently, big hotel chain, they were buying from an ad tech vendor, and the ROAS was so awesome. It's like, oh, wow, we're getting so many bookings that we couldn't possibly turn this off because our ROAS would drop. I basically convinced them, turn it off for a week. Check the velocity of your bookings, see if anything changed. And they did that. Nothing changed.
Nothing.
And then leave it off for another week. Nothing changed. The velocity of bookings continued exactly the same. So then they realized, okay, well, all of those bookings were not caused by our ad spend on this vendor. Okay, now, that's an oversimplification. You can run geographic holdouts, right? A particular state, a particular city, a particular DMA, whatever you want to do. Just run those holdout groups, run those turn-off experiments to see if anything was actually incremental and see if anything was actually caused by the digital marketing. The reporting can be so easily tricked, right? Going back to our VTC conversation from before, our view through conversions, that it looks really, really good and you think it's working. And in the years past, they love showing those reports to their CFO and CEO to prove that what they're doing was working really, really well. But now it's like, okay, well, you got to be the skeptic first, right? Because no one else is going to be skeptical for you. You have to do that yourself to say, did this actually drive any incremental? And let me relay another story just to kind of illustrate how easily the attribution can be gamed. Okay, so I'm going to talk about footfall. That means someone walking into a store, like a Dunkin' Donuts, like a Taco Bell, or whatever. How do you think the ad tech companies were able to game footfall? Right? In 2017, 2018, there were location-based companies that said, oh, you don't have to pay us for the ad impressions. You don't have to pay us for the clicks. You only pay us when someone walks into your Dunkin' Donuts. That sounded like the dream, right? It sounded like digital. It's like, oh, it's pay for performance. or getting someone actually into your store. How could you not love that? So now I'm going to let you guys guess. How did they game that to make it look like they were driving a ton of people into your stores?
I'm basing, I don't know, GPS triangulation, making it wider or bigger than what it actually is potentially. So like a lot of those stores that you're mentioning, they're probably around malls. It's just looking at the total mall traffic and attributing potentially like to the store.
Yeah, there's some of that, right? The accuracy of the GPS and all that kind of stuff, especially when you don't have GPS to use. The IP addresses could be like miles away from your actual store. Okay. Anyway, it's a form of cheating. So basically, they would draw polygons around, the Dunkin' Donuts, the Taco Bell restaurants, and whatever. So it's like when this device walked into the polygon, you get to count it as footfall. Okay. Now, going back to the whole concept of view through conversions, right? There was the concept of ad exposure. So if this device were marked as exposed and then a sale happened afterwards, you could attribute that sale to that exposed device. So what the ad tech companies were doing as a form of cheating is they would basically buy billions of low-cost ad impressions. Could be like, 5-cent CPMs, 10-cent CPMs that run in the background. And they would cause all 360 million devices in the US to be marked as exposed. If every single device in the entire US got marked as exposed, then when any of those devices walk into a polygon, they get to claim credit for that, even if that person goes to Dunkin' Donuts every morning anyway, because that's their habit. So basically, by causing most of these devices to be marked as exposed, they could claim credit for everything. Many flavors of this kind of fraud dating back to the eBay 2013 affiliate fraud.
Right.
Both of their super affiliates, right, were basically super affiliates because they were cheating. Right? They were basically setting cookies or causing that affiliate cookie to be set on as many humans' devices as possible. So whenever those humans end up buying something from eBay, they got the affiliate revenue share under false pretenses. So it was just a form of cookie stuffing behind the scenes. And we've now seen that being done by browser extensions like the Honey extension, right? They're just cooking everybody. So then when you buy from any advertiser, they get to claim credit for it, right? So all of this is just to show you how easily gamed the attribution is. So unless you're the one calling BS on it and actually looking harder to say, is this incremental or not, no one else is going to do that for you because it's not to their incentive to do that for you.
So there's a couple problems with what you're saying. You're speaking the truth. You've got, on one hand, all these channels that are puking data at you. And then you build out these, as we were talking about before, you build out these spreadsheets and go, here's my ad spend. Here's even by the individual ad. And here's the, CPM, CPC, all the details, all the metrics. ROAS is included in there. And you submit that as part of your performance report. On the other hand, and that you can get almost instantly. On the other hand, when you're talking about incrementality, setting up incrementality tests is not always easy. I was recently doing this with a client, and there's a whole bunch of variables that go in. It's messy, and then you need real data from the business, and that's not as fast as getting data from the platform because it's always puking data. And so then there's this idea of like, well, what are you guys doing? Like, where's the speed? Where's the urgency? And so we need to drive sales today and not, I don't need it in a month from now. I need it to know what happened. So there's this dichotomy almost of like the urgency of the business needs, but then the pace at which the business can produce reports of real data to be able to validate and justify.
And basically, you've articulated that there are multiple layers of misaligned incentives. That's why a lot of this stuff keeps going, even though a lot of us rationally understand that it's not real. But again, once you've reported so many sales to your bosses, you're not going to go back and say, whoops, 90% of those were not incremental, right? You're going to do everything you can to protect what you've said to them before. So that's also why I've observed that small businesses or medium businesses have much better actual ROI and ROAS than large companies. Because if they spend $1,000 on digital and it doesn't actually produce a return, they don't have the next $1,000 they can spend. So for small and medium businesses, they're always in the analytics. They're always looking to see whether it's driving incremental sales for them, like actual incremental sales. When you're a very large CPG and you're giving your money to a media agency to spend for you, their job is to spend it all. right? And you can also argue that if you're selling toilet paper and paper towel in grocery stores, you don't actually get to see the end sale. Now, there are mechanisms where you could try to gauge that. But again, most of those big CPG companies are selling to regional distributors. And then those regional distributors are selling to the end grocery stores. And like you said, there's a huge time delay between getting the sales reporting back to say, okay, did this actually drive any incremental? And it's also extremely hard to isolate cause and effect because most of these large marketers have every single channel going at the same time, right? TV ads, radio ads, print ads, digital ads, YouTube ads, everything going. You can't attribute those sales back to a particular channel because you can't differentiate all that. Every form of advertising is still running. So like you said, yes, there are challenges with measurement. But if you're a responsible marketer and you actually want to do right by your company, and if you're a good steward of the funds that your company gave you to spend, you'd actually put in the work.
Yeah.
And actually run some of the more simple ones, which I just talk about as turn-off experiments. In most cases, marketers are not going to run massive turn-off experiments because they have to spend it all. Mm-hmm. If you turn it off, it's making it harder for you to spend it all. But at least run, say, one state holdout, right? You're marketing across the entire US, turn off one state and see if the sales velocity actually changed. Right. If it didn't, then okay, there's not a strong correlation or between cause and effect from your digital ads and your sales. So those are experiments that should be easier to run. You have to run them yourself because again, the platforms that you're buying from are not going to tell you that because it's not to their incentive to tell you.
I want to be mindful of time here. I know we only have a few more minutes left with you. So one to kind of get into what are those things that marketers need to be thinking about? So first question we have in this segment, if you will, is to all the marketing leaders out there today, what would you recommend that they should be doing to improve both the media quality and reduce fraud risk? You already talked about turning off the expanded audiences. What else should they be thinking about?
I would just say, in general, overarching statement is move away from black box algorithms. So that applies to the platforms telling you there's great ROAS or ROI, and actually try to, measure something where you can actually see the supporting data and actually understand why something is happening or why it's not happening. So, I mean, my platform is that, and that's kind of, I'm not here to promote my platform, but it's like, why did something get marked as a bot? Or why did it not get marked as a bot? If the verification vendor can't tell you that or won't tell you that, okay, you should probably trust them less. You need to be able to look at your own data. And yeah, sometimes it sounds onerous, but like people learn how to use Google Analytics for their own website, right? Google didn't teach them, but if you actually care and you spend time with it, you're going to learn it. So in essence, find ways to avoid black boxes. Find ways to get more data than you've had before. So again, the verification thing was like, oh, you get the spreadsheet that says it's 1% IVT. Then literally you don't do anything else after that. Okay, that may not be good enough anymore. So look for additional data, ask the next question. So why is it 1% IVT for the last 10 years instead of just assuming that it's correct? So even if they're not deliberately ripping you off, they may not even know, right? So a lot of the salespeople and account people that work at the verification vendors, they don't know how the tech works, so they can't actually explain it to you. So look for a better alternative. Look for more detailed data so that you can actually understand. So that's a simple thing, right? It's not about fraud or not. We talked about best practices in terms of campaign setup and just do all of those. You also still have to have your own set of tools to verify that you're getting what you paid for. So when you set up the campaign in DB360 or Trade Desk, whatever, don't assume that their reporting is correct. So they're not malicious. They're not trying to rip you off, but it just may not be accurate. And let me be very specific here. The placement reports that you get. So years ago, like at the 2016 elections, people were up in arms about Breitbart.com, right? They didn't want their ads to be going up on Breitbart. So everyone started blocking that domain. And then when you look at the placement reports, Breitbart.com went away. So they thought, yay, our blocks worked. But did you know that Breitbart.com, every fraudulent website, all these MFA sites All they have to do is simply lie about the domain in the bid request to get around the blocks and to not appear in your placement reports. The reason for that is the placement reports from your DSP records the domain that was passed in the bid request, not the domain where it actually ended up. So when you look at the placement reports, you'll say, oh, well, Breitbart's not in here. All these MFA sites, all these fraudulent sites are not in here. It must be working. But actually, the placement reports contain errors. So you actually have you need to have an independent set of tools like Fou Analytics. You can use that to then actually measure where your ads went. And if there's a discrepancy, right, the site that we detected your ad on is different than the site they said in the bid request, you know they lied to you. And then you take further steps to correct it, right? That's why it's important to have independent tools.
I have one last question for you too. That as we're talking about this, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, let's say I'm going to work today, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to bring this into my organization and this message, because it's as you said before, it's something you've been talking about for 15-ish years. What have you learned about how to make this more acceptable? Like, I keep thinking about antibodies and viruses, and in a way, this thing feels like a virus idea to me, and a lot of the organizations would reject it. So what have you seen that works when you bring up conversations like this?
Very simple, and this is how I've changed the way I talk about it. So when I first started out, I talk about it as fraud, right? And there's all these vendors that talk about fraud detection, all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to talk about fraud. Nobody wants to admit that they were ripped off by ad fraud, right? So the CMOs have every incentive to cover it up and whatever. So now I talk about it as analytics. So in the past, you had to trust the verification vendors, their reports saying 1% IVT, whatever. Right now, it's about upgrading to better analytics. And put simply, if you can see better, you can do better. So the advertisers are not to blame. The agencies are not to blame. The verification vendors are to blame, because when you use their reports, you couldn't see the fraud that was there. So now upgrade your analytics so that you can see better. And it might be shocking. You might see 90% red in your campaigns, but even then, don't panic, because now that you can see where the fraud is coming from, you can actually do something about it. So it does take courage to want to take a look, because there's a lot of fear of finding out.
Find something.
Yeah. But I would say it's better for you to find out now than when your CFO or your CEO comes knocking, like, what the hell is going on, right? So for a lot of the marketers, overcome the FOFO, the fear of finding out, by actually measuring it. And when you can see, and in some cases, it's not actually that bad. If you have very strict buying practices, you're not going to see 90% red. You might see 20% red, but then you can further improve that, right? So the whole point is find out, look at it, get more analytics, so you don't have to trust the black box verification vendors. You don't have to trust the black box attribution reports that the platforms give you. Now you have your own set of data so that you can take action.
Yeah, this has been incredible, Dr. Fou. How can people find out more about you and the great work that you're doing?
Just Google my name, and also find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. And also, you're welcome to try Fou Analytics for free at Fou Analytics, F-O-U, analytics with an S.
That's awesome. Thanks again for your time today, Dr. Fou. This was an incredible conversation.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that.